Hello? Hello? Now I have the microphone on, I have the volume on 5, and I have the microphone in input 1, and I'm getting a reading up as far as 2. I'm going to turn it up now to 7 and see what happens.
And the day gathered in to a single light, and the shadows rising from the brim of the night. Too few
I remember she took me aside one day to explain to me that in this world of music, that there was a lot of pretty unimaginative stuff.
Oh, well, I just delighted in her folk songs, and when there were parts for the two of us, we would do duets, and oh, they were so good. They were so delightful.
I'll tell you a story about Johnny McClory. That's how my story was begun. I'll tell you another about Johnny's brother, and now you may think my story is done. The first time I met Johnny, I could see he was bonny, and when he looked at me, how he did glow. But just as we were gazing at each other, Johnny's brother was down in Mexico.
At some point, my brother and his friends and I were playing a board game. We were playing either diplomacy or Risk, but it was one of these games of world conquest where you have armies and navies, and they as you capture more production centers, you get more armies and navies. And we were short a player, so we wanted Connie to play, and she was resistant at first, but we got her to play. And she immediately moved all of her armies to Iceland, where there's no production at all, and was set up to completely lose the game. And the point of this was she wasn't going to play a war game. And essentially as a pacifist, she wanted to let us know that there were other ways to go. You didn't have to fight global war, right? And of course we just got mad at her. We're just like, geez, you're just ruining our game. But and so I'm sure she wanted us to reflect on this, but instead we were just mad at her.
Am I recording? Yeah.
I think Tim was about 6 at the time. And he very much wanted to take piano lessons because his older brother was taking piano lessons. And we weren't sure it was a terrific idea. The piano teacher was sort of a dolt, I thought. Mrs. Danforth, remember?
Mrs. Danforth, yeah.
Mrs. Danforth taught Tim and a friend of his, David, at the same time. I think it was unpleasant for both of them. Anyway, he decided he didn't want to take piano lessons anymore. Now he didn't want to take them. It was New Year's Day, and he told us he had a surprise for us, and he wanted us to leave because he was preparing the surprise. So we went over to Connie's house, which was several blocks away.
He wanted us to be away so that he could find every piece of clothing in the house.
Oh, yeah.
That he could go with. He was just packed with.
Yeah.
Well, it was zero, and he had no place to go.
But I never figured out how he thought he was going to live because he didn't have any money. And so we went back, and there was a note that said, "Dear Mom and Dad, I would rather face the cold than go on with my practicing," meaning that he was running away from home to avoid his piano lessons. We spread out in the neighborhood trying to find him. Connie drove around the neighborhood and found him.
He was bustled in the doorway of a
Hamburger joint.
hamburger joint.
And she proposed that he take piano lessons from her. And so he thought that was a good idea. And she didn't have him practicing. She had him make up music.
Yeah, she tutored him in composition.
Yeah.
It was really.
Really, it was inspired. You know, it was wonderful.
We should have done that to start.
I know. Dumb us.
I remember long sessions with her, just playing, and it was really useful education. I mean, at a very early age, I got this idea that you could have chord progressions and have a song built on those, and then have a completely different song built on those same chord progressions. So things like, I mean, even when I was really young, I was probably 8 or something like that, just playing things like Heart and Soul and old sort of very simple jazz standards, and then improvising on top. I would just visit her and have kind of overnights with her, and we would play board games, and then I would sleep over. That was basically the schema of the evening. We would play the board game Life, and then I would spend the night. And once late at night, she did play me a recording that I now realize was a recording of her, and I don't know why she did it. I was just about to fall asleep, and she said, I want to play you something. And she played me a few songs, and I don't really think I made much of it. I would like to say, it was this revelatory experience, but it was just this woman singing, and then I asked, what was that? And she said, that was me, and I was like, oh, it was you? And then I fell asleep, so.
Never heard anything quite like it. They weren't jazz, of course. They weren't blues. They weren't folk music either. They were really personal songs.
We get to know her as being a deeply, and passionately political person. I mean, really a person with very radical beliefs, and trying to make great change in the world around her. And I actually love the way that it manifests in her songs. I mean, it's almost very sly. It's very subtle.
It just seemed like she was a lot of things wrapped up in one person.
And where they buried her I forget, but the man in the sky isn't married yet.
No, we need a third part. I think that's what you were doing.
What?
The It's not an alto or baritone.
But there was another verse, I don't remember it.
I first heard Connie Converse, it must have been in 2003, because that was when Gene Deitch's, a book of Gene Deitch's cartoons that he made in the 50s for a record magazine. That book was published by Fantagraphics in 2003, and that's what brought Gene Deitch to my show. Gene Deitch and his son Kim came on Spinning on Air, my WNYC show, to talk about that work. And Gene was really excited to have a chance to share some of the music he loves, because he's a real music fan. And at that point, he'd been living for decades in Czechoslovakia and came for a visit to New York. But he sent in advance a CDR of some of the music he wanted to share on the show. And there were Czech Dixieland bands and all sorts of crazy things that I was amused, he was enthusiastic about, but didn't necessarily grab me in a visceral way. But in the midst of the Czech Dixieland bands, there was this one song, which was Connie Converse, and the song was One by One.
We go walking in the dark. We go walking out at night, and it's not as lovers go two by two, to and fro, but it's one by one by one in the dark. We go walking out at night, as we wander through the grass, we can hear each other pass, but we're far apart, far apart in the dark. We go walking out at night, with the grass so dark and tall. We are lost recall, if the moon is down and the moon is down. We are walking in the dark. If I had your hand in mine, I could shine like the morning sun, like the sun.
And I was flabbergasted. You know, I was listening with half an ear to the Czech Dixieland, but when Connie Converse began, I thought, wow. And I actually wondered, this song is familiar. How do I know this song? And it turns out I couldn't have, I guess. But it had something familiar about it. But in any case, it just, it floored me, because my ears are always open and tuned into the art of song. It's something I'm involved in myself. And here was a song that had an incredible directness and simplicity and power, but it was the power of restraint, and the emotion was so deep and perceptive and stark. And yet there was a creative spark in there, formally, in terms of the music, how it was put together. It wasn't just a standard chord progression, which so many songs share sort of standard progressions. They follow the same paths, you know. But this one was different. And so that's the kind of music I'm always hungering for. And I got in touch with Gene right away saying, you know, Music sounds like fun. Who is Connie Converse?
Okay, well, in 1954, I was still living in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. My best friend and colleague was a guy named Bill Bernal. He was always somehow, and I don't know exactly how, but he always hears about interesting people. And we used to have sort of an open house for people mainly who came to listen to jazz records. And Bill showed up one day with this woman. It was kind of a surprise. I'd never heard of her or anything, and so that's how it started. So she came in and just didn't look like any of the usual people we came in touch with. She looked like she was a school teacher. She was very withdrawn, and she obviously was hoping to get discovered. And I guess Bill told her that I was somebody who might be able to help her. She wasn't singing these little childish children's songs that I was expecting when I saw her. You know, she was singing really deep, emotional songs, as I say, about her life and about the world in general. And, well, we got so excited about it that, of course, we wanted to have her come back again, and we invited more people. And I think there were about 3 and maybe 4 times that she came to our place. And I recorded her singing the same song several times, and eventually put together the reel that ended up on at the Lauderdale Records.
And it was just like almost one of these quintessential, just really beautiful radio moments where, you know, you're in a car and suddenly you hear something that changes things. It just like certainly changed. It changed the voyage I was on, whether it was to New York or from New York, I forget. But I remember I was just riding with my brother, and we were it just put like this really beautiful quiet, really beautiful silence on the whole ride, because we both found her song to just be completely arresting and gorgeous. But then the little bit that Jean explained about her story on that show was also really intriguing and sad and frustrating. It haunted me for a good 3 or 4 years until David and I decided to actually pursue this music and try to release it.
I really sort of became familiar with the music, not at the time that I knew her, but kind of later in life. And by that I mean, 10, 15, 20 years ago, because my dad kept these tapes and was very interested in getting people to hear this stuff, and he kind of did what he could to do that. In fact, he had these old reel-to-reel tapes. She was I think a very early 4-track overdubber. I don't know to what extent people were doing that in their bedrooms in 1955, but she was. So so you hear her singing with herself in overdubbed vocals and so on, which I don't know. That seems surprising for the time.
There are lots of reasons why Connie's music strikes me deeply, I think. And we've talked about the emotions and the smart words and the original composition style. But I have to say there's also something just in the sound of these recordings. And the sound of the recordings is so evocative of how they were made. Her sort of shy banter and straightforward performance in the recordings that Gene Deitch made at his home parties, and the lonely person alone with her creativity environment that comes across in the recordings she made for her brother.
She was also kind of deeply hilarious, and
she did have a very
and her
unique sense of humor.
Yeah, like really unique, and in some ways sort of biting, or it's like this like intellectual humor that is sometimes lost on me, but then when I get the joke, it's just like it just kind of like stays in my soul. It's just so funny.
You should tell me about it, unless you want to do this later. But
no.
about what she did do in college.
Well, I don't really.
Well, what I'm thinking of is she quit.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that she did most of that out of college.
She got a 4-year scholarship to Mount Holyoke. 4-year scholarship.
It was their biggest scholarship.
Yeah.
And they had one of them each year.
Yeah, and her mother had gone to Mount Holyoke, and her grandmother had gone to Mount Holyoke. So here she was, going to Mount Holyoke, and after 2 years, she quit and went to New York. I mean, she was going to go for adventure, not this stodgy old girls' school.
Ever since we met, the world's been upside down. And if you don't stop troubling me, you'll drive me out of town. But if you go away, as trouble ought to do, where will I find another soul to tell my trouble to? Then my bed is made of stone, a star has burnt my eye. I'm going down to the willow tree and teach her how to cry. But if you go away, as trouble ought to do, where will I find another soul to tell my trouble to?
I was really impressed by how quickly she got to know people when she came out here, and how well liked she was. You know, people just sensed the quality of her, and the fun. You know, the wit and the fun and the talent. And she did have some feeling of not being successful.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, that she had such promise and such ability, but she hadn't put it together somehow. I've often thought that if she had gone not to a girls' school, but to a university, that the story might, where there were men and women, that it really might have been a happier time for her.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that's true.
And that, you know, the scholarship was, of course, irresistible. But it meant that she couldn't get good employment with her 2 years of Mount Holyoke, you know. And I'll bet that constituted, well, you know, a failure for her.
Connie was extremely closed about her personal relationships, and that was not what she came to our place for. She naturally, Bill Bernal had convinced her that if she came to my place that I would record her and that the recording could be useful to her. But she was not interested in telling any more about herself than she could get away with. She would answer direct questions, but not expound any further on it. So nobody really knows about her personal relationship, what she was really like. I mean, you know, if you looked at her, you might guess she was a lesbian. You might guess anything about her because there was nothing. There was really no hints at all about her personal relationships. You could only thing you could get out of Connie is what she sang and about trying to interpret what her songs really meant.
She was writing music as a woman in a way that people didn't write music as women in the time that she was writing music. Like, she was not fit for when she was very well.
But also, I mean, there's just an obvious loneliness that runs through a lot of the music. And there's this funny, there's this funny absent lover kind of thing happening where she's never singing very specifically to anyone. In the song, for which I don't think we have a definitive title, it's the squirrel thing song. She's clearly singing to someone, but she's singing to them when they're not there.
You know, the distilled version of her story is that here's a person who made music who didn't find her audience, who was then disappointed, who then skipped town, just disappeared. But like that disappointment, or the disappointment of her music is not directly related to her skipping town. She also had like 2 different careers between when she was making music and when she is known to disappear. She had like 3 or 4 different careers in her lifetime, and she was constantly able to reinvent herself.
I don't remember her talking regretfully about music, but you have to think that that was something that she tried really, really, really hard at, and eventually gave up, at least gave up in terms of public, appreciation for it. But also, I do, as far as we know, she did stop. She did stop writing songs, and still enjoyed playing, but there was a creative period that was over. Also, I mean, there was a lot of drinking, and there was a lot of. I remember a lot of nights with my parents and her drinking quite a bit, and I think that was just taken as a normal thing. But I think she had an alcohol dependence. I think she didn't have any personal life that we know about, and I mean, undoubtedly she was clinically depressed and had never succeeded in a career in a public sense.
We knew she was depressed, and we thought maybe she'd enjoy being up north. And
Well, we had tried to get her to come up north every year as part of that. I
did we?
recall. I think
I've
we
forgotten
did.
that.
So it wasn't different in that sense. Till we got home and found out she left, and it was
Yeah.
very different, of course.
She had written a very large number of people notes, sort of goodbye notes, which, put some extra color on the question of what she was thinking when she was leaving, because if this was just a casual departure, she would not have sent out, 20 notes. And she wrote me a note, and I really wish I still had this. I don't know what happened to it. I think it was lost, soon. I think I lost it sometime soon after I got it. But to me, because we'd all been reading Tolkien, to me she framed it as just like Bilbo had to go away. She had to go away, and that was her attempt to explain it to me, that I wouldn't understand it, but that she had to go away, and that was the note. So.
As an overeducated peasant, I've read a good bit about middle-age depression. Oh, there's another thing that reminds me. I mean,
Yeah, I know what you're gonna say.
she had been advised that she needed to have a hysterectomy, which I gather is not a joy. In several cases other than my own. I know there are temporary chemical therapies, sometimes temporary is long enough. Experts agree it's not single isolable mental disease. Probably it's a few simple humanities mixed up in a pot of random concomitant circumstances. In the months after I got back from my desperate flight to England, I began to realize that my new personal incapabilities were still stubbornly hanging in. I did fight, but they hung in. Maybe my time in England, financed largely by my friends, was too benign a treatment. At any rate, it's the only sustained period in my life that I now look back on as
In the silliest detail.
In the silliest detail, as fun. Quote, as fun, quote, unproductive fun. Not getting anything done, I did sit in my bedsitter very often, bemused despair, but also had fun.
I don't know.
So that's her description of
Of her
Yeah.
staying in.
Since then, I've watched the elegant, energetic people of Ann Arbor, those I know and those I don't, going about their daily business on the streets and in the buildings, and I've felt a detached admiration for their energy and elegance. If I ever was a member of this species, perhaps it was a social accident that has now been canceled.
As a child at that time, it didn't seem like that momentous an event at the time, because she wrote some notes. She was going away for a while. She wasn't around. It didn't have the force of some tragedy at the time. It was just kind of, oh, Connie's going away for a while, something like that. I mean, my own theories now are, my theory now is that she was intending to do away with herself and set this up in some very clever way to make it not look like that or not be verifiably like that. I do think that there's some possibility that she was going to try another life somewhere else for a while. And I do remember her saying to me at one point, I'd just like to have a job, just a simple job, a job I don't think about in the off hours, like working at Woolworths at the Five and Dime as a cashier. She said that to me because then when I would go home, I wouldn't be thinking about the job anymore. And I know in retrospect she had a very demanding sort of editorial job that consumed her at work and outside of work, and she was very sort of harried and frazzled by that. But there was an expression there of some ambition to just have a simple life, and the quote I remember from her made it sound like that would be a very simple life and a very reclusive life. And so there's a little bit of me that wonders if she did attempt to do something like that for a little while. I don't think there's any possibility that she was alive for decades afterward, because I think we would have heard from her. I think curiosity would have won out.
We were horrified. I was horrified, partly because I really believed she was going to do herself in. I mean, you know, she had this patter in these letters about going somewhere else and finding, and I didn't believe that for a minute. I suspect I was less convinced by the letter than probably most of the other people who got it. There was a sort of, the letters I've seen all have one sort of thing in common, which in effect is her need to get away to a new place and a new start, and that's what she was headed for as she drove out of Ann Arbor.
My parents really did wrestle with the question of whether it was even legitimate to chase after her, because there's this question of and they were told this by somebody, or I'm muddling memories. I think the private detective may have told this to my uncle, but somebody who dealt with missing person cases all the time said, you know, you can be missing if you want to, and there's nothing that says that missing people have to be found, and if you reach out to a missing person and find them and they say they don't want to be found, then you have to back off, because everybody has the right to pick up and go somewhere else. And so I think my parents didn't try as hard to find her as you might think they would have, in part out of respect for her choices. I mean, whatever else was going on, she made a very deliberate choice to leave.
Yeah, she left town in her VW bug. And that's why, you know, we've always been puzzled by how she got rid of the car. I've always felt that she drove it into some water.
Yeah, well, that's my theory, too. She once had me drive considerably out of our way because she wanted what the French call Finistère, these little strips of land that go out into large bodies of water. The end of the earth is what it means.
Yeah, Land's End.
And she saw that on the map, and she just had to drive out on it.
I would love to believe that Connie Converse somehow found the means to do what she said she wanted to do in her goodbye letter, which was to start anew. But I doubt that was really her aim. I think she was pretty heavily depressed at that point, and probably wanted to go away to be gone rather than to start something new. I don't know. I love to think of her. I don't know. Somewhere in the country on a farm that she's been running for a couple decades and living quietly and happily, but I'm afraid I doubt it.
Well, you remember she wrote you and said, I'd like you to, she gave you a check or something and said, I would like you to pay my health insurance up to, remember this? Up to a certain point.
Oh, did she? I forgot that. Yeah.
But you said not after that point.
Yeah. Well, naturally, I would have done exactly what she said.
Sure. Sure.
Oh, but I want to understand. About too tall, can't miss that.
In between two tall mountains, there's a place they call lonesome. Don't see why they call it lonesome. I'm never lonesome when I go there. See that bird sitting on my windowsill, well, he's saying whippoorwill all the night through. See that brook running by my kitchen door, well, it couldn't talk no more if it was you. Up that tree there's sort of a squirrel thing, sounds just like we did when we were quarreling. In the yard I keep a pig or two, they drop in for dinner like you used to do. I don't stand in the need of company, with everything I see talking like you. Up that tree there's sort of a squirrel thing, sounds just like we did when we were quarreling. You may think you left me all alone, but I can hear you talk without a telephone. I don't stand in the need of company, with everything I see talking like you. See that bird sitting on my windowsill, well, he's saying whippoorwill all the night through, just whippoorwill all the night through. In between two tall mountains there's a place they call lonesome. Don't see why they call it lonesome. I'm never lonesome, now I live there.
When did you write that? How'd you happen to?
I have the microphone about 8 inches away, and it's going way up. I'm getting a very good response.
We lived alone, my house and I. We had the earth, we had the sky. I had a lamp against the dark, and I was happy as a lark. We lived alone, my house and I. We had the earth, we had the sky. I had a lamp against the dark, and I was happy as a lark. I had a stove and a window screen, I had a table painted green, sat on a chair with a broken back, wearing a pretty potato sack. I had a rug upon the floor, and roses grew around my door. I had a job, my wants were few, they were until I wanted you. And when I set my eyes on you, nothing else would do, nothing else would do.
That's a nice, oh, that.